Hello, everyone, and welcome to Toto Tuesday, where I'll be reading Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, brought to you by Junior Classic Books. In just a few moments. Right now, I'm going to let people know that I'm streaming, and I'll be right back. And he's a sawhorse. A what? A sawhorse. Princess Ozma once brought him to life with a witch powder when she was a boy. Was Ozma once a boy? Asked Zeb wonderingly. Yes, a wicked witch enchanted her so she could not rule her kingdom. But she's a girl now, and the sweetest, loveliest girl in all the world. A sawhorse is a thing that they saw boards on, remarked Jim with a sniff. It is when it's not. It is when it's not alive, acknowledged the girl. But this sawhorse can trot as fast as you can, Jim, and he's very wise too. Paul, I'll race the miserable wooden donkey any day in the week, cried the cab horse. Dorothy did not reply to that. She felt that Jim would know more about the sawhorse later on. The time dragged wearily enough to the eager watchers, but finally the wizard announced that 4 o'clock had arrived, and Dorothy caught up the kitten and began to make the signal that had been agreed upon to the faraway invisible Ozma. Nothing seems to happen, said Zeb doubtfully. Oh, we must give Ozma time to put on the magic bell, replied the girl. She had scarcely spoken the words when she suddenly disappeared from the cave, and with her went the kitten. There had been no sound of any kind, and no warning. One moment, Dorothy sat behind them with the kitten in her lap, and a moment later, the horse, the piglets, the wizard, and the boy were all that remained in the underground prison. Dorothy made the signal. I believe we'll soon follow her, announced the wizard in a tone of great relief. For I know something about the magic of the fairyland that is called the Land of Oz. Let us be ready, for we may be sent for any minute. He put the piglets safely away in his pocket again, and then he and Zeb got into the buggy and sat unexpectedly upon the seat. Will it hurt? Asked the boy in a voice that trembled a little. Not at all, replied the wizard. It will all happen as quick as a wink. And that was the way it did happen. The cab horse gave a nervous start, and Zeb began to rub his eyes to make sure he was not asleep, for they were in the street of a beautiful emerald green city, bathed in a grateful green light that was especially pleasing to their eyes, and surrounded by merry-faced people in gorgeous green and gold costumes of many extraordinary designs. Before them were the jewel-studded gates of a magnificent palace, and now the gates opened slowly as if inviting them to enter the courtyard, where splendid flowers were blooming and pretty fountains shot their silver sprays into the air. Zeb shook the reins to rouse the cab horse from his stupor of amazement. For the beginning, for the people were beginning to gather around and stare at the strangers. Get cried the boy, and at the word, Jim slowly trotted into the courtyard and drew the buggy along the jeweled driveway to the great entrance of the royal palace. Chapter 15. Old Friends Are Reunited. Many servants dressed in handsome uniforms stood ready to welcome the new arrivals, and when the wizard got out of the buggy, a pretty girl in a green gown cried out in surprise. Why, it's Oz, the wonderful wizard, come back again. The little man looked at her closely, and then took both the maiden's hands in his and shook them cordially. Oh, my word, he exclaimed. It's little Jellia Jam, as part and pretty as ever. Why not, Mr. Wizard? Asked Jellia, bowing low. But I'm afraid you cannot rule the Emerald City as you used to, because we now have a beautiful princess whom everyone loves dearly. And the people will not willingly part with her, added a tall soldier in a captain general's uniform. The wizard turned to look at him. Did you not wear green whiskers at one time? He asked. Yes, but said the soldier, but I shaved them off long ago, and since then I have risen from private to be the chief general of the royal armies. That's nice, said the little man, but I assure you, my good people, that I do not wish to rule the Emerald City, he added earnestly. In that case, you are very welcome, cried all the servants, and it pleased the wizard to note the respect with which the royal retainers bowed before him. His fame had not been forgotten in the land of Oz by any means. Where is Dorothy? Inquired Zeb anxiously, as he left the buggy and stood beside his friend the little wizard. She is with the princess in the private rooms of the palace, replied Jelly Jam. But she has ordered me to make you welcome and to show you to your apartments. The boy looked around him with wondering eyes. Such magnificence and wealth as was displayed in this palace was more than he ever dreamed of, and he could scarcely believe that all the gorgeous glitter was real and not tinsel. What's to become of me? Asked the horse uneasily. He had seen considerable of life in the cities in his younger days, and knew that this regal palace was no place for him. It perplexed even Jelly Jam for a time to know what to do with the animal. The Green Maiden was much astonished at the sight of so unusual a creature, for horses were unknown in this land. But those who lived in the Emerald City were apt to be astonished by strange sights. So after inspecting the cab horse and noting the mild look in his big eyes, the girl decided not to be afraid of him. There are no stables here, said the wizard, unless some have been built since I went away. We have never needed them before, answered Jellia. For the sawhorse lives in a room of the palace, being much smaller and more natural in appearance than this great beast you have brought with you. Do you mean that I'm a freak? Asked Jim angrily. Oh no, she hastened to say. There may be many more like you in the place you come from, but in Oz, any horse but a sawhorse is unusual. This mollified Jim a little, and after some thought, the Green Maiden decided to give the cab horse a room in the palace, such a big building having many rooms that were seldom in use. So Zeb unharnessed Jim, and several of the servants then led the horse around to the rear, where they selected a nice large apartment that he could have all to himself. Then Julius said to the wizard, Your own room, which was back of the great throne room, has been vacant ever since you left us. Would you like it again? Yes, indeed, returned the little man. It will seem like being at home again, for I lived in that room for many, many years. He knew the way to it, and a servant followed him, carrying his satchel. Zeb was also escorted to a room so grand and beautiful that he almost feared to sit in the chairs or lie upon the bed, lest he might dim their splendor. In the closets he discovered many fancy costumes of rich velvets and brocades, and one of the attendants told him to dress himself in any of the clothes that pleased him, and to be prepared to dine with the princess and Dorothy in an hour's time. Opening from the chamber was a fine bathroom, having a marble tub with perfumed water, so the boy, still dazed by the novelty of his surroundings, indulged in a good bath, and then selected a maroon velvet costume with silver buttons to replace his own soiled and much worn clothing. There were silk stockings and soft leather slippers with diamond buckles to accompany his new costume. And when he was fully dressed, Zeb looked much more dignified and imposing than ever before in his life. He was all ready when an attendant came to escort him to the presence of the princess. He followed bashfully and was ushered into a room more dainty and attractive than it was splendid. Here he found Dorothy, seated beside a young girl, so marvelously beautiful that the boy stopped suddenly with a gasp of admiration. But Dorothy sprang up and ran to seize her friend's hand, drawing him impulsively toward the lovely princess, who smiled most graciously upon her guest. Then the wizard entered, and his presence relieved the boy's embarrassment. The little man was clothed in who smiled most graciously upon her guest. Then the wizard entered, and his presence relieved the boy's embarrassment. The little man was clothed in black velvet, with many sparkling emerald ornaments decorating his breast, but his bald head and wrinkled features made him appear more amusing than impressive. Ozma had been quite curious to meet the famous man who had built the Emerald City and united the Munchkins, Gillikins, Quadlings, and Winkies into one people. So when they were all four seated at the dinner table, the princess said, "Please tell me what, Mr. Wizard, whether you called yourself Oz after this great country, or whether you believe my country is called Oz after you. It is a matter that I have long wished to inquire about, because you are of a strange race, and my own name is Ozma. No one, I am sure, is better able to explain this mystery than you."
"That is not true," answered the little wizard. "Therefore, it will give me pleasure to explain my connection with your country. In the first place, I must tell you that I was born in Omaha, and my father, who was a politician, named me Oscar Zoroaster Fadrig Isaac Norman Henkel Emmanuel Ambrose Diggs being the last name, because he could think of no more to go before it. Taken altogether, it was a dreadfully long name to weigh down a poor innocent child, and one of the hardest lessons I ever learned was to remember my own name. When I grew up, I just called myself OZ, because the other initials were PINHEAD, and that spelled pinhead, which was a reflection on my intelligence.
"Surely no one could blame you for cutting your name short," said Ozma sympathetically. "But didn't you cut it almost too short?"
"Perhaps so," replied the wizard. When a young man, I ran away from home. When a young man, I ran away from home and joined a circus. I used to call myself a wizard and do tricks of ventriloquism."
"What does that even mean? What does that mean?"
asked the princess. "Throwing my voice into an object, any object I pleased. to make it appear that the object was speaking instead of me. Also, I began to make balloon ascensions on my balloon, and on all the other articles I used in the circus, I painted the two initials OC to show that those things belonged to me. One day, my balloon ran away with me and brought me across the deserts to this beautiful country. When the people saw me come from the sky, they naturally thought me some superior creature and bowed down before me. I told them I was a wizard and showed them some easy tricks that amazed them. And when they saw the initial painting painted on the balloon, they called me Oz.
Now I begin to understand,
said the princess, smiling. At that time, continued the wizard, busily eating his soup while talking, there were 4 separate countries in this land. Each one of the 4 being ruled by a witch. But the people thought my power was greater than that of the witches, and perhaps the witches thought so too, for they never dared oppose me. I ordered the Emerald City to be built just where the 4 countries cornered together. When it was completed, I announced myself the ruler of the land of Oz, which included all the 4 countries of the Munchkins and Yellowkins, the Winkies and the Quadlings. Over this land I ruled in peace for many years, until I grew old and longed to see my native city once again. So, when Dorothy was first blown to this place by a cyclone, I arranged to go away with her in a balloon. But the balloon escaped too soon and carried me back alone. After many adventures, I reached Omaha, only to find that all my old friends were dead or had moved away. So, having nothing else to do, I joined a circus again and made my balloon ascension until the earthquake caught me.
That is quite a history,
said Ozma.
But there is a little more history about the land of Oz that you do not seem to understand.
But there is a little more history about the land of Oz that you do not seem to understand. Perhaps for the reason that no one ever told it to you. Many years ago, before you came here, this land was united under one ruler, as it is now. The ruler's name was always Oz, which means in our language, great and good. Or if the ruler okay, considering it's but and then it's after the preposition of.
But there is a little more history that you do about the land of Oz that you do not seem to understand. Perhaps for the reason that no one ever told you. Many years before you came here, this land was united under one ruler, as it is now, and the ruler's name was always Oz, which means, in our language, great and good. Or, if the ruler happened to be a woman, her name was always Ozma. But once upon a time, 4 witches learned together to depose the king and rule the 4 parts of the kingdom themselves. So, when the ruler, my grandfather, was hunting one day, one wicked witch named Mombi stole him and carried him away, keeping him a close prisoner. Then the witches divided up the kingdom and ruled the 4 parts of it until you came here. That was why the people were so glad to see you, and why they thought from your initials that you were the rightful ruler.
But at that time, said the wizard thoughtfully, there were 2 good witches and 2 wicked witches ruling in the land.
Yes,
replied Ozma, because the good witch had conquered Mombi in the north, and Glinda the good had conquered the evil witch in the south. But Mombi was still my grandfather's jailer, and afterwards, my father's jailer, when I was born, she transformed me into a boy, hoping that no one would ever recognize me and know that I was the rightful princess of the land of Oz. But I escaped from her and am now the ruler of my people. I am very glad of that, said the wizard. I hope you will consider me one of your most faithful and devoted subjects. We owe a great deal to the wonderful wizard, continued the princess, for it was you who built this splendid Emerald City. Your people built it, he answered. I only bossed the job, as we say in Omaha. But you ruled it wisely and well for many years, said she, and made the people proud of you, proud of your magical art. So, as you are now too old to wander abroad and work in a circus, I offer you a home here as long as you live. You shall be the official wizard of my kingdom and be treated with every respect and consideration. I accept your kind offer with gratitude, gracious princess, the little man said in a soft voice. And they could all see that teardrops were standing in his keen old eyes. It meant a good deal to him to secure a home like this. He's only a humbug wizard, though, said Dorothy, smiling at him. And that is the safest kind of a wizard to have, replied Ozma promptly. Oz, can you do some good tricks, humbug or no humbug? Announced Zeb, who was now feeling more at ease. He shall amuse us with his tricks tomorrow, said the princess. I've sent messengers to summon all of Dorothy's old friends to meet her and give her welcome, and they ought to arrive very soon now. Indeed, the dinner was no sooner finished than in rushed the Scarecrow to hug Dorothy in his padded arms and tell her how glad he was to see her again. The wizard was also most heartily welcomed by the straw man, who was an important personage in the land of Oz. How are your brains? Inquired the little humbug, as he grasped the soft, stuffed hands of his old friend. Working finely, answered the Scarecrow. I'm very certain, Oz, that you gave me the best brains in the world, for I can think with them day and night, when all other brains are fast asleep. Dorothy and Ozma. How long did you rule the Emerald City after I left here? Was the next question. Quite a while, until I was conquered by a girl. Quite a while, until I was conquered by a girl named General Ginger. But Ozma soon conquered her, with the help of Glinda the Good. And after that, I went to live with Nick Chopper, the Tin Woodman. Just then a loud cackling was heard outside, and when a servant threw open the door with a loud bow, a yellow hen strutted in. Dorothy sprang forward and caught the fluttery fowl in her arms, uttering at the same time a glad cry. Oh, Belinda, she said, how fat and sleek you've grown. Why shouldn't I? Asked the hen in a sharp, clear voice. I live on the fat of the land, don't I? You have everything you wish for, said the princess. Around Belinda's neck was a string of beautiful pearls, and on her legs were bracelets of emeralds. She nestled herself comfortably in Dorothy's lap until the kitten gave a snarl of jealous anger and leaped up with a sharp claw fiercely bared to strike Belinda a blow. But the little girl gave the angry kitten such a severe cuff that it jumped down again without daring to scratch.
How horrid of you, Eureka!
Cried Dorothy.
Is that the way to treat my friends? You have strange friends, seems to me,
replied the kitten in a surly tone.
Seems to me the same way,
said Belinda scornfully.
If that beastly cat is one of them. Look here, said Dorothy sternly. I won't have any quarreling in the land of Oz. I can tell you, everybody lives in peace here and loves everybody else. And unless you two, Belinda and Eureka, make up and be friends, I'll take my magic belt and wish you both home again. Immediately. So there.
They were both much frightened at the threat, and promised meekly to be good, but it was never noticed that they became very warm friends for all that. And now the Tin Woodsman arrived, his body most beautifully nickel-plated, so that it shone splendidly in the brilliant light of the room. The Tin Woodsman loved Dorothy most tenderly, and welcomed with joy the return of the little wizard. Sir, said he to the latter, I never can thank you enough for the excellent heart you once gave me. It has made me many friends, I assure you, and it beats as kindly and lovingly today as it ever did. I'm glad to hear that, said the wizard. I was afraid it would get moldy in that tin body of yours. Not at all, returned Nick Chopper. It keeps finely, being preserved in my airtight chest.
Zeb was a little shy when first introduced to these strange people, but they were so friendly and sincere that he soon grew to admire them very much, even finding some good qualities in the yellow hen. But he became nervous again when the next visitor was announced. This, said Princess Ozma, is my friend, Mr. H.M. Hogglebug, T.E., who assisted me at one time when I was in great distress, and now the Dean of the Royal College of Athletic Science.
Ah, said the wizard, I'm pleased to meet so distinguished a personage.
H.M., said the Wogglebug pompously, means highly magnified, and T.E. means thoroughly educated. I am in reality a very big bug, and doubtless the most intelligent being in all this broad domain.
Well, how well you disguise it, said the wizard, but I don't doubt your word in the least.
Nobody doubts it, sir, replied the Wogglebug, and drawing a book from its pocket, the strange insect turned its back on the company and sat down in a corner to read. Nobody minded this rudeness, which might have seemed more impolite in one less thoroughly educated. So they straightway forgot him and joined in a merry conversation that kept them well amused until bedtime arrived. Chapter 16. Jim the Cab Horse. Jim the Cab Horse found himself in possession of a large room with a green marble floor and carved marble wainscoting, which was so stately in its appearance that it would have awed anyone else. Jim accepted it as a mere detail, and at his command the attendants gave his coat a good rubbing, and combed his mane and tail, and washed his hoofs and fetlocks. Then they told him
dinner would be served directly, and he replied that they could not serve it too quickly to suit his convenience. First, they brought him a steaming bowl of soup, which the horse eyed in dismay. "Take that stuff away," he commanded. "Do you take me for a salamander?" They obeyed at once, and next served a fine, large turbot on a silver platter, with drawn gravy poured over it. "Fish!" cried Jim with a sniff. "Do you take me for a tomcat? Away with it!" The servants were a little discouraged, but soon they brought in a great tray containing 2 dozen nicely roasted quail on toast. "Well, well," said the horse, now thoroughly provoked. "Do you take me for a weasel? How stupid and ignorant you are in the land of Oz, and what dreadful things you feed upon. Is there nothing that is decent to eat in this place?" The trembling servants sent for the royal steward, who came in haste and said, "What would your highness like for dinner?" "Highness?" repeated Jim, who was unused to such titles. "You are at least 6 feet high, and that is higher than any other animal." "You are at least 6 feet high, and that is higher than any other animal in this country," said the steward. "Well, my highness would like some oats," declared the horse. "Oats? We have no whole oats," the steward replied with much difference. "But there is any quality of oatmeal, which we would often cook for breakfast." "Oatmeal is a breakfast dish," added the steward humbly. "I'll make it a dinner dish," said Jim. "Fetch it on, and don't cook it, as you value your life." You see, the respect shown the worn-out old cab horse made him a little arrogant, and he forgot he was a guest, never having been treated otherwise than as a servant since the day he was born, until his arrival in the land of Oz. But the royal attendants did not heed the animal's ill temper. They soon mixed a tub of oatmeal with a little water, and Jim ate it with much relish. Then the servants heaped a lot of rugs upon the floor, and the old horse slept on the softest bed he had ever known in his life. In the morning, as soon as it was daylight, he resolved to take a walk and try to find some grass for breakfast. So he ambled calmly through the handsome arch of the doorway, turned the corner of the palace, wherein all seemed asleep, and came face to face with the sawhorse. Jim stopped abruptly, being startled and amazed. The sawhorse stopped at the same time, and stared at the other with its strange protruding eyes, which were mere knots in the log that formed its body. The legs of the sawhorse were 4 sticks driven into holes bored in the log. Its tail was a small branch that had been left by accident, and its mouth a place chopped in one end of the body, which projected a little and served as a head. The ends of the wooden legs were shod with plates of solid gold, and the saddle of the Princess Ozma, which was of red leather set with sparkling diamonds, strapped to the clumsy body. "For goodness sake, what sort of a being are you?" Jim's eyes stuck out as much as those of the sawhorse, and he stared at the creature with his ears erect, and his long head down, back until it rested against his arched neck. In this comical position, the two horses circled slowly around each other for a while, each being unable to realize what the singular thing might be which it now beheld for the first time. Then Jim exclaimed, "For goodness sake, what sort of a being are you?" "I'm a sawhorse," replied the other. Oh, I believe I've heard of you, said the cab horse. But you are unlike anything that I expected to see. I do not doubt it, the sawhorse observed with a tone of pride. I am considered quite unusual. You are indeed, but a rickety wooden thing like you has no right to be alive. I couldn't help it, returned the other, rather crestfallen. Ozma sprinkled me with a magic powder, and I just had to live. I know I'm not much account, but I'm the only horse in all the land of Oz, so they treat me with great respect. You? A horse? Oh, not a real one, of course. There are no real horses here at all, but I'm a splendid imitation of one. Jim gave an indignant neigh. Look at me, he cried. Behold, a real horse. The wooden animal gave a start, and then examined the other intently. Is it possible that you are a real horse? He murmured. Not only possible, but true, replied Jim, who was gratified by the impression he had created. It is proved by my fine points. For example, look at the long hairs on my tail, with which I can whisk away the flies. The flies never trouble me, said the sawhorse. And notice my great strong teeth, which I nibble the grass. It is not necessary for me to eat, observed the sawhorse. Also examine my broad chest, which enables me to draw deep, full breaths, said Jim proudly. I have no need to breathe, returned the other. No, you miss many pleasures, remarked the cab horse pityingly. You do not know the relief of brushing away a fly that has bitten you, nor the delight of eating delicious foods, nor the satisfaction of drawing a long breath of fresh, pure air. You may be an imitation of a horse, but you're a mighty poor one. Oh, I cannot hope ever to be like you, sighed the sawhorse. But I am glad to meet at last a real horse. You are certainly the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. The praise won Jim completely. To be called beautiful was a novelty in his experience, said he. Your chief fault, my friend, is in being made of wood, and that I suppose you cannot help. Real horses like myself are made of flesh and blood and bones. I cannot see the bones at all. Bones, all right. I can see the bones, all right, replied the sawhorse, and they are admirable and distinct. Also, I can see the flesh, but the blood, I suppose, is tucked away inside. Exactly, said Jim. What good is it? Asked the sawhorse. Jim did not know, but he would not tell the sawhorse that. If anything cuts me, he replied, the blood runs out to show where I am cut. You poor thing, cannot even bleed when you are hurt. But I am never hurt, said the sawhorse. Once in a while I get broken up some, but I am easily repaired and put in good order again, and I never feel a break or a splinter in the least. Jim was almost tempted to envy the wooden horse for being unable to feel pain, but the creature was so absurdly unnatural that he decided he would not change places with it under any circumstance. How did you happen to be shod with gold? He asked. Princess Ozma did that, was the reply, and it saves my legs from wearing out. We've had a good many adventures together, Ozma and I, and she likes me. The cab horse was about to reply when suddenly he gave a start and a neigh of terror, and stood trembling like a leaf. For around the corner had come two enormous savage beasts, treading so lightly that they were upon him. Before he was aware of their presence, Jim was in the act of plunging down the path to escape, when the sawhorse cried out, "Stop, my brother! Stop, real horse! These are friends, and will do you no harm." Jim hesitated, eyeing the beast fearfully. One was an enormous lion with clear, intelligent eyes, tawny mane, bushy and well kept, and a body like yellow plush. The other was a great tiger with purple stripes around his lithe body, powerful limbs, and eyes that showed through the half-closed lids like coals of fire. The huge forms of these monarchs of the forest and jungle were enough to strike terror at the stoutest heart. It is no wonder Jim was afraid to face them. The sawhorse introduced the stranger in a calm tone, saying, "This, noble horse, is my friend, the Cowardly Lion, who is the valiant king of the forest, but at the same time a faithful vassal of Princess Ozma. And this is the hungry tiger, the terror of the jungle, who longs to devour fat babies, but is prevented by his conscience from doing so. These royal beasts are both warm friends of little Dorothy, and have come to the Emerald City this morning to welcome her to our fairyland." Hearing these words, Jim resolved to conquer his alarm. He bowed his head with as much dignity as he could muster toward the savage-looking beast, who in return nodded in a friendly way. "Is not the real horse a beautiful animal?" asked the sawhorse admiringly. "That is doubtless a matter of taste," returned the lion. "In the forest he would be thought ungainly, because his face is... you know what? In the forest, he... Yeah, you know what? In the forest, he would be thought ungainly, because his face is stretched out, and his neck is uselessly long. His joints, I notice, are swollen and overgrown, and he lacks flesh, and is old in years. And dreadfully tough," added the hungry tiger in a sad voice. My conscience would never permit me to eat so tough a morsel as the real horse." "I'm glad of that," said Jim, "for I also have a conscience, and it tells me not to crush your skull with a blow of my powerful hoof." If he thought to frighten the striped beast by such language, he was mistaken. The tiger seemed to smile and winked one eye slowly. "You have a good conscience, friend horse," it said, "and if you attend to its teachings, it will do much to protect you from harm. Some day I will let you try to crush in my skull, and afterward you will know more about tigers than you do now." "Any friend of Dorothy," remarked the Cowardly Lion, "must be our friend as well. So let us cease this talk of skull crushing and converse upon more pleasant subjects. Have you breakfasted, Sir Horse?" "Not yet," replied Jim, "but here is plenty of excellent clover, so if you will excuse me, I will eat. Now, he's a vegetarian," remarked the tiger as the horse began to munch the clover. "If I could eat grass, I would not need a conscience, for nothing could then tempt me to devour babies and lambs." Just then, Dorothy, who had risen early and heard the voices of the animals, ran out to greet her old friends. She hugged both the lion and the tiger with eager delight, but seemed to love the king of beasts a little better than she did his hungry friend, having known him longer. By the time they had indulged in a good talk, and Dorothy had told them all about the awful earthquakes and her recent adventures, the breakfast bell rang from the palace, and the little girl went inside to join her human comrades. As she entered the great hall, a voice called out in a rather harsh tone, "What, are you here again?" "Yes, I am," she answered, looking all around to see where the voice came from. "What brought you back?" was the next question, and Dorothy's eyes rested on an antlered head hanging on the wall just over the fireplace, and caught its lips in the act of moving. "Good gracious!" she exclaimed. "I thought you were stuffed." "So I am," replied the head. "But on a a time, I was part of the gump, which Ozma sprinkled with the powder of life. I was then, for a time, the head of the finest flying machine that was ever known to exist, and we did many wonderful things. Afterward, the gump was taken apart and I was put back on the swell. But I can still talk when I feel in the mood, which is not often." "It's very strange," said the girl. "What were you when you were first alive?" "That I have forgotten," replied the gump's head, "and I do not think it is of much importance. But here comes Ozma, so I'd better hush up, for the princess doesn't like me to chatter since she changed her name from Tip to Ozma." Just then, the girlish ruler of Oz opened the door and greeted Dorothy with a good morning kiss. The little princess seemed fresh and rosy and in good spirits.
"Breakfast is served, dear," she said, "and I am hungry, so don't let us keep it waiting a single minute."
Jim stood trembling like a leaf. Chapter 17. The 9 Tiny Piglets? After breakfast, Ozma announced that she had ordered a holiday to be observed throughout the Emerald City in honor of her visitors. The people had learned that their old wizard had returned to them, and all were anxious to see him again, for he had always been a rare favorite. So first there was to be a grand procession through the streets, after which the little old man was requested to perform some of his wizardries in the great throne room of the palace. In the afternoon, there were to be games and races. The procession was very imposing. First came the Imperial Cornet Band of Oz, dressed in emerald velvet uniforms, with slashes of pea green satin and buttons of immense cut emeralds. They played the national air called the Oz Spangled Banner, and behind them were the standard bearers with the royal flag. This flag was divided into 4 quarters, one being colored sky blue, another pink, a third lavender, and a fourth white. In the center was a large emerald green star, and all over the 4 quarters were sewn spangles that glittered beautifully in the sunshine. The colors represented the 4 countries of Oz, and the green star in the Emerald City. Just behind the royal standard bearers came the Princess Ozma in her royal chariot, which was of gold encrusted with emeralds and diamonds. Set in exquisite designs, the chariot was drawn on this occasion by the Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger, who were decorated with immense pink and blue bows. In the chariot rode Ozma and Dorothy, the former in splendid raiment and wearing her royal coronet, while the little Kansas girl wore around her waist the magic belt she had once captured from the Gnome King. Following the chariot came the Scarecrow mounted on the sawhorse, and the people cheered him almost as loudly as they did their lovely ruler. Behind him stalked, with regular jerky steps, the famous machine man called Tick Tock, who had been wound up by Dorothy for the occasion. Tick Tock moved by clockwork and was made all of burnished copper. He really belonged to the Kansas girl, who had much respect for his thoughts after they had been properly wound and set going. But as the copper man would be useless in any place but a fairy country, Dorothy had left him in charge of Ozma, who saw that he was suitably cared for. There followed another band after this, which was called the Royal Court Band, because the members all lived in the palace. They wore white uniforms with real diamond buttons and played What is Oz Without Ozma very sweetly. Then came Professor Wogglebug with a group of students from the Royal College of Scientific Athletics. The boys wore long hair and striped sweaters and yelled their college yell every other step they took, to the great satisfaction of the populace, which was glad to have the evidence that their lungs were in good condition. The brilliantly polished Tin Woodman marched next at the head of the Royal Army of Oz, which consisted of 28 officers, from generals down to captains. There were no privates in the army because all were so courageous and skillful that they had been promoted one by one until there were no privates left. Jim and the buggy followed the old cab horse, being driven by Zeb, while the wizard stood up on the seat and bowed his bald head right and left in answer to the cheers of the people who crowded thick about him. Taken altogether, the procession was a grand success, and when it had returned to the palace, the citizens crowded into the great throne room to see the wizard perform his tricks. The first thing the little humbug did was to produce a tiny white piglet from underneath his hat and pretend to pull it apart, making two. This act he repeated until all of the 9 tiny piglets were visible, and they were so glad to get out of his pocket that they ran around in a very lively manner. The pretty little creatures would have been a novelty anywhere, so the people were as amazed and delighted at their appearance as even the wizard could have desired. When he had made them all disappear again, Ozma declared she was sorry they were gone, for she wanted one of them to pet and play with. So the wizard pretended to take one of the piglets out of the hair of the princess, while really he shyly took it from his inside pocket, and Ozma smiled joyously as the creature nestled in her arms, and she promised to have an emerald collar made for its fat neck, and to keep the little squealer always at hand to amuse her. Afterward, it was noticed that the wizard always performed his famous trick with 8 piglets, but it seemed to please the people just as well as if there had been 9 of them. I need to take some medicine, so I'm going to go ahead and take a commercial break. We'll be right back after the official ad starts and all that. This little room back of the throne room, the wizard had found a lot of things he had left behind him when he went away in the balloon. For no one had occupied the apartment in his absence. There was enough material there to enable him to prepare several new tricks, which he had learned from some of the jugglers in the circus, and he had passed part of the night in getting them ready. So he followed the tricks of the 9 tiny piglets with several other wonderful feats that greatly delighted his audience, and the people did not seem to care a bit whether the little man was a humbug wizard or not, so long as he succeeded in amusing them. They applauded all his tricks, and at the end of the performance begged him earnestly not to go away again and leave them. In that case, said the little man gravely, I will cancel all of my engagements before the crowned heads of Europe and America, and devote myself to the people of Oz. For I love you all so well that I can't deny you nothing. After the people had been dismissed with this promise, our friends joined Princess Ozma at an elaborate luncheon in the palace, where even the tiger and the lion were sumptuously fed, and Jim the cab horse ate his oatmeal out of a golden bowl with 7 rows of rubies, sapphires, and diamonds set around the rim of it. In the afternoon, they all went to a great field outside the city gates, where the games were to be held. There was a beautiful canopy for Ozma and her guest to sit under and watch the people run races and jump and wrestle. You may be sure the folks of Oz did their best with such a distinguished company watching them. And finally, Zeb offered to wrestle with a little munchkin who seemed to be the champion. In appearance, he was twice as old as Zeb, for he had long pointed whiskers and wore a peaked hat with little bells all around the brim of it, which tinkled gaily as he moved. But although the munchkin was hardly tall enough to come to Zeb's shoulders, he was so strong, clever, that he laid the boy 3 times on his back, apparent ease. Zeb was greatly astonished in his defeat, and when the princess joined her people in laughing at him, he proposed a boxing match with the munchkin, to which the little Ozite readily agreed. But the first time that Zeb managed to give him a sharp box on the ears, the munchkin sat down upon the ground and cried until the tears ran down his whiskers. Because he had been hurt, this made Zeb laugh in turn, and the boy felt comforted to find that Ozma laughed as merrily at her weeping subject as she had at him. Just then, the Scarecrow proposed a race between the Sawhorse and the Cab Horse. And although all the others were delighted at the suggestion, the Sawhorse drew back, saying, Such a race would not be fair. Of course not, added Jim, with a touch of scorn. Those little wooden legs of yours are not half as long as my own. It isn't that, said the Sawhorse modestly, but I never tire, and you do. Bah! Cried Jim, looking with great disdain at the other. Do you imagine for an instant that such a shabby imitation of a horse as you are can run as fast as I? I don't know, I'm sure, replied the Sawhorse. What? That is what we are trying to find. That is what we are trying to find out, remarked the Scarecrow. The object of a race is to see
who can win it, or at least that is what my excellent brain tells me.
Once, when I was young, said Jim, I was a racehorse and defeated all who dared run against me. I was born in Kentucky, where all the best and most aristocratic horses come from.
But you're old now, Jim, suggested Zeb.
Old? Why, I can run a colt today, replied Jim. I only wish there was a real horse here for me to race with. I'd show the people a fine sight, I can tell you.
Then why not race with the sawhorse? Inquired the Scarecrow.
He's afraid, said Jim.
Oh no, answered the sawhorse.
I merely said it wasn't fair, but if my friend, the real horse, is willing to undertake the race, I am quite ready.
So they unharnessed Jim and took the saddle off the sawhorse, and the two strangely matched animals stood side by side for the start. When I say go, Zeb called to them, you must dig out and race until you reach those 3 trees you see over yonder. Then circle round them and come back again. The first one that passes the place where the princess sits shall be named the winner. Are you ready?
I suppose I ought to give the one and dummy a good start at me, growled Jim. Never mind that, said the sawhorse. I'll do the best I can.
Go, cried Zeb, and at the word the 2 horses leaped forward, and the race was begun. The wizard took a piglet from Ozma's hair. Jim's big hoofs pounded away at a great rate, and although he did not look very graceful, he ran in a way to do credit to his Kentucky breeding. But the sawhorse was swifter than the wind. Its wooden legs moved so fast that their twinkling could scarcely be seen, and although so much smaller than the cab horse, it covered the ground much faster. Covered the ground much faster. Before they had reached the trees, the sawhorse was far ahead, and the wooden animal returned to the starting place, and was being lustily cheered by the Ozites before Jim came panting up to the canopy where the princess and her friends were seated. The hungry tiger teaches Jim a lesson. I am sorry to record the fact that Jim was not only ashamed of his defeat, but for a moment lost control of his temper. As he looked at the comical face of the sawhorse, he imagined that the creature was laughing at him. So, in a fit of unreasonable anger, he turned around and made a vicious kick that sent his rival tumbling head over heels upon the ground, and broke off one of its legs and its left ear. An instant later, the tiger crouched and launched its huge body through the air, swift and resistless as a ball from a cannon. The beast struck Jim full on his shoulder and sent the astonished cab horse rolling over and over amid shouts of delight from the spectators who had been horrified by the ungracious act he had been guilty of. When Jim came to himself and sat upon his haunches, he found the cowardly lion crouched on one side of him, and the hungry tiger on the other, and their eyes were glowing like balls of fire. I beg your pardon, I'm sure, said Jim meekly. I was wrong to kick the sawhorse, and I am sorry I became angry at him. He has won the race and won it fairly, but what can a horse of flesh do against a tireless beast of wood?
Hearing this apology, the tiger and the lion stopped lashing their tails and retreated with dignified steps to the side of the princess. No one must injure one of our friends in our presence, growled the lion, and Zeb ran to Jim and whispered that unless he controlled his temper in the future, he would probably be torn to pieces. Then the Tin Woodsman cut a straight and strong limb from a tree with his gleaming axe and made a new leg and a new ear for the sawhorse. And when they had been securely fastened in place, Princess Ozma took the coronet from her own head and placed it upon that of the winner of the race. Said she, "My friend, I reward you for your swiftness by proclaiming you Prince of Horses, whether of wood or of flesh, and hereafter all other horses in the land of Oz, at least, must consider imitations, and you the real champion of your race." There was more applause at this, and then Ozma had the jeweled saddle replaced upon the sawhorse, and herself rode the victor back to the city at the head of the grand procession. "I ought to be a fairy," grumbled Jim, as he slowly drew the buggy home. "For to be just an ordinary horse in a fairy country is to be of no account whatever. It's no place for us, Zeb." "It's lucky we got here, though," said the boy, and Jim thought of the dink from the dark cave and agreed with him. Chapter 18. The Trial of Eureka the Kitten? Several days of festivity and merrymaking followed, for such old friends did not often meet, and there was much to be told and talked over between them, and many amusements to be enjoyed in this delightful country. Ozma was happy to have Dorothy beside her, for girls of her own age, with whom it was proper for the princess to associate, were very few, and often the youthful ruler of Oz was lonely for lack of companionship. It was the third morning after Dorothy's arrival, and she was sitting with Ozma and their friends in a reception room, talking over old times, when the princess said to her maid, "Please go to my boudoir, Jella, and get the white piglet I left on the dressing table. I want to play with it." Jellia at once departed on the errand, and she was gone so long that they had almost forgotten her mission when the green-robed maiden returned with a troubled face. "The piglet is not there, Your Highness," said she. "Not there?" exclaimed Ozma. "Are you sure?" "I have hunted in every part of the room," the maid replied. "Was not the door closed?" asked the princess. "Yes, Your Highness, I am sure it was, for when I opened it, Dorothy's white kitten crept out and ran up the stairs." Hearing this, Dorothy and the wizard exchanged startled glances, for they remembered how often Eureka had longed to eat a piglet. The little girl jumped up at once. "Come, Ozma," she said anxiously. "Let us go ourselves to search for the piglet." So the two went to the dressing room of the princess and searched carefully in every corner and among the vases and baskets and ornaments they stood about the pretty boudoir, but not a trace could they find of the tiny creatures they sought. Dorothy was nearly weeping by this time, while Ozma was angry and indignant. When they returned to the others, the princess said, There is little doubt that my pretty piglet has been eaten by that horrid kitten, and if that is true, the offender must be punished." "I don't believe Eureka would do such a dreadful thing," cried Dorothy, much distressed.
Go and get my kitten, please, Jellia, and we'll hear what she has to say about it.
The Green Maiden has hastened away, but presently returned and said,
The kitten will not come. She threatened to scratch my eye out if I touched her. Where is she?
asked Dorothy.
Under the bed in your own room,
was the reply. So Dorothy ran to her room and found the kitten under the bed.
Come here, Eureka,
she said.
I won't,
answered the kitten in a surly voice.
Oh, Eureka, why are you so bad?
The kitten did not reply.
If you do not come to me right away,
continued Dorothy, getting provoked,
I'll take my magic belt and wish you in
the country of the Gurgles.
Why do you want me?
asked Eureka, disturbed by this threat.
You must go to Princess Ozma. She wants to talk to you. All right,
returned the kitten, creeping out.
I'm not afraid of Ozma or anyone else.
Dorothy carried her in her arms back to where the others sat in grieved and thoughtful silence.
Tell me, Eureka,
said the princess gently.
Did you eat my pretty piglet? I won't answer such a foolish question,
asserted Eureka with a snarl.
Oh, yes you will, dear,
Dorothy declared.
The piglet is gone, and she ran out of the room when Jellia opened the door. So if you are innocent, Eureka, you must tell the princess how you came to be in her room and what has become of the piglet. Who accuses me?
asked the kitten defiantly.
No one,
answered Ozma.
Your actions alone accuse you. The fact is that I left my little pet pig in my dressing room, laying asleep upon the table, and you must have stolen in without my knowing it. When next the door has opened, you ran out and hid yourself. And the piglet was gone. That's none of my business,
growled the kitten.
Don't be impudent, Eureka,
admonished Dorothy.
It is you who are impudent,
said Eureka,
for accusing me of such a crime when you can't prove it except by guessing.
Ozma was now greatly incensed by the kitten's conduct. She summoned her captain general, and when the long, lean officer appeared, she said,
Carry this cat away to prison and keep her in safe confinement until she is tried by law for the crime of murder.
So the general captain took Eureka from the arms of the now weeping Dorothy, and in spite of the kitten's snarls and scratches, carried it away to the prison. What shall we do now? asked the Scarecrow with a sigh, for such a crime had cast a gloom over all the company.
I will summon the court to meet in the throne room at 3 o'clock,
replied Ozma.
I myself will be the judge, and the kitten shall have a fair trial. What will happen if she is guilty?
asked Dorothy.
She must die,
answered the princess. 9 times? inquired the Scarecrow.
As many times as is necessary,
was the reply.
I will ask the Tin Woodsman to defend the prisoner because he has such a kind heart. I am sure he will do his best to save her. And the Wogglebug shall be the public accuser, because he is so learned that no one can deceive him.
Who will be the jury? Asked the Tin Woodsman. Portrait of the Wizard of Oz. View larger image. Portrait of the Wizard of Oz.
There ought to be several animals on the jury, said Ozma, because animals understand each other better than the people understand them. So the jury shall consist of the Cowardly Lion, the Hungry Tiger, Jim the Cab Horse, the Yellow Hen, the Scarecrow, the Wizard, Tick-Tock, the Machine Man, the Sawhorse, and Zeb of Hogson's Ranch. That makes the 9 which the law requires, and all my people shall be admitted to hear the testimony. They now separated to prepare for the sad ceremony, for whenever an appeal is made to law, sorrow is almost certain to follow even in a fairyland like Oz. But it must be stated that the people of that land were generally so well behaved that there was not a single lawyer among them, and it had been years since any ruler had sat in judgment upon an offender of the law. The crime of murder being the most dreadful crime of all, tremendous excitement prevailed in the Emerald City when the news of Eureka's arrest and trial became known. The wizard, when he returned to his own room, was exceedingly thoughtful. He had no doubt Eureka had eaten his piglet, but he realized that a kitten cannot be depended upon at all times to act properly, since its nature is to destroy small animals and even birds for food. The tame cat that we keep in our houses today is descended from the wild cat of the jungle, a very ferocious creature indeed. The wizard knew that if Dorothy's pet was found guilty and condemned to death, the little girl would be made very unhappy. So, although he grieved over the piglet's sad fate as much as any of them, he resolved to save Eureka's life. Sending for the Tin Woodsman, the wizard took him into a corner and whispered, "My friend, it is your duty to defend the white kitten and try to save her. But I fear you will fail, because Eureka has long wished to eat a piglet. To my certain knowledge, and my opinion, is that she has been unable to resist the temptation. Yet, your disgrace and death would not bring back the piglet, but only serve to make Dorothy unhappy. So I intend to prove the kitten's innocence by a trick." He drew from his inside pocket one of the 8 tiny piglets that were remaining and continued, "This creature you must hide in some safe place. And if the jury decides that Eureka is guilty, you may then produce this piglet and claim it is the one that was lost. All the piglets are exactly alike, so no one can dispute your word. This deception will save Eureka's life, and then we may all be happy again." "I do not like to deceive my friends," replied the Tin Woodsman. "Still, my kind heart urges me to save Eureka's life, and I can usually trust my heart to do the right thing. So, I will do as you say, friend wizard." After some thought, he placed the little pig inside his funnel-shaped hat, and then put the hat upon his head, and went back to his room to think over his speech to the jury. Chapter 19. The Wizard Performs Another Trick. At 3 o'clock, the throne room was crowded with citizens, men, women, and children, being eager to witness the greatest
The Great Trial. Princess Ozma, dressed in her most splendid robes of state, sat in the magnificent emerald throne, with a jeweled scepter in her hand and her sparkling coronet upon her fair brow. Behind her throne stood the 28 officers of her army and many officials of the royal household. At her right sat the strangely assorted jury animals, animated dummies and people all gravely prepared to listen to what was said. The kitten had been placed in a large cage just before the throne, where she sat upon her haunches and gazed through the bars at crowds around her. With seeming unconcern, and now at a signal from Ozma, the Woggle Bug arose and addressed the jury. His tone was pompous, and he strutted up and down in an absurd attempt to appear dignified. Your Royal Highness and fellow citizens, he began. The small cat you see a prisoner before you is accused of the crime of first murdering and then eating our esteemed ruler's fat piglet, or else first eating and then murdering it. In either case, a grave crime has been committed, which deserves a great punishment.
Do you mean my kitten must be put in the grave?
Asked Dorothy. Don't interrupt, little girl, said the Wogglebug. When I get my thoughts arranged in a good order, I do not like to have anything upset them, throw them into confusion. If your thoughts were any good, they wouldn't become confused, remarked the Scarecrow earnestly. My thoughts are always. Is this a trial of thoughts or of kittens? Demanded the Wogglebug. It's a trial of one kitten, replied the Scarecrow. But your manner is a trial to us all.
Let the public accuser continue, called Ozma from her throne, and I pray you do not interrupt him.
The criminal who now sits before the court, licking her paw, resumed the Wogglebug, has long desired to unlawfully eat the fat piglet, which was no bigger than a mouse, and finally she made a wicked plan to satisfy her depraved appetite for pork. I can see her in my mind's eye. What's that? Asked the Scarecrow. I say I can see her in my mind's eye. The mind has no eye, declared the Scarecrow. It's blind. Your Highness, cried the Wogglebug, appealing to Ozma, have I a mind's eye or haven't I?
If you have it, it is invisible, said the princess.
Very true, returned the Wogglebug, bowing. I say I see the criminal in my mind's eye, creeping stealthily into the room of our Ozma, and secreting herself when no one was looking until the princess had gone away and the door was closed. Then the murderer was alone with her helpless victim, the fat piglet, and I see her pounce upon the innocent creature and eat it up. Are you still seeing with your mind's eye? Inquired the Scarecrow. Of course. How else could I see it? And we know the thing is true, because since the time of that interview, there is no piglet to be found anywhere. Eureka in court. I suppose if the cat has been gone, instead of the piglet, your mind's eye would see the piglet eating the cat, suggested the Scarecrow. Very likely, acknowledged the Wogglebug. And now, fellow citizens and creatures of the jury, I assert that so awful a crime deserves
death. And in the case of the ferocious animal criminal before you, who is now washing her face, the death penalty should be inflicted 9 times. There was great applause when the speaker sat down. Then the princess spoke in a stern voice. Prisoner, what have you to say for yourself? Are you guilty or not guilty? Why, that's for you to find out, replied Eureka. If you can prove I'm guilty, I'll be willing to die 9 times. But a mind's eye is no proof, because the Woggle Bug has no mind to see with. Never mind, dear, said Dorothy. Then the Tin Woodsman arose and said,
Respected jury and dearly beloved Ozma, I pray you not to judge this feline prisoner unfeelingly. I do not think the innocent kitten can be guilty, and surely it is unkind to accuse a luncheon of being a murderer. Eureka is the sweet pet of a lovely little girl whom we all admire, and gentleness and innocence are her chief virtues. Look at the kitten's intelligent eyes.
Here Eureka closed her eyes sleepily.
Gaze at her smiling countenance.
Here Eureka snarled and showed her teeth.
Mark the tender pose of her soft padded little hands.
Here Eureka bared her sharp claws and scratched at the bars of the cage.
Would such a gentle animal be guilty of eating a fellow creature? No, 1,000 times no.
Oh, cut it out. Oh, cut it short, said Eureka. You've talked long enough.
I'm trying to defend you,
remonstrated the Tin Woodsman. Then say something sensible, retorted the kitten. Tell them it would be foolish for me to eat the piglet, because I had sense enough to know it would raise a row if I did. But don't try to make out I'm too innocent to eat a fat piglet. If I could do it and not be found out, I imagine it would taste mighty good.
Perhaps it would, to those who eat, remarked the Tin Woodsman. I myself, not being built to eat, have no personal experience in such matters. But I remember that our great poet once said, "To eat is sweet, when hunger's seat demands a treat of savory meat." Take this into consideration, friends of the jury, and you will readily decide the kitten is wrongfully accused and should be set at liberty.
When the Tin Woodman sat down, no one applauded him, for his arguments had not been very convincing, and few believed that he had proved Eureka's innocence. As for the jury, the members whispered to each other for a few minutes, and then they appointed the Hungry Tiger their spokesman. The huge beast slowly arose and said,
Kittens have no conscience, so they eat whatever pleases them. The jury believes the white kitten, known as Eureka, is guilty of having eaten the piglet owned by Princess Ozma, and recommends that she be put to death in punishment of the crime.
The judgment of the jury was received with great applause, although Dorothy was sobbing miserably at the fate of her pet. The princess was just about to order Eureka's head chopped off with the Tin Woodsman's axe when that brilliant personage once more arose and addressed her.
Your Highness, said he, see how easy it is for a jury to be mistaken. The kitten could not have eaten your piglet, for here it is. He took off his funnel hat, and from beneath it produced a tiny white piglet, which he held aloft that all might see it clearly. Ozma was delighted and exclaimed eagerly, "Give me my pet, Nick Chopper." And all the people cheered and clapped their hands, rejoicing that the prisoner had escaped death and been proved to be innocent. As the princess held the white piglet in her arms and stroked its soft hair, she said, "Let Eureka out of the cage, for she is no longer a prisoner, but our good friend. Where did you find my missing pet, Nick Chopper?" "In a room of the palace," he answered. "Justice," remarked the Scarecrow with a sigh. "It is a dangerous thing to meddle with. If you hadn't happened to find the piglet, Eureka would surely have been executed." "But justice prevailed at the last," said Ozma. "For here is my pet, and Eureka is once more free." "I refuse to be free," cried the kitten in a sharp voice, "unless the wizard can do his trick with 8 piglets. If he can produce but 7, then this is not the piglet that was lost, but another one." "Hush, Eureka," warned the wizard. "Don't be foolish." "Don't be foolish," advised the Tin Woodsman, "or you may be sorry for it."
The piglet that belonged to the princess wore an emerald collar," said Eureka loudly enough for all to hear. "So it did!" exclaimed Ozma. "This cannot be the one the wizard gave me." "Of course not. He had 9 of them altogether," declared Eureka. "And I must say it was very stingy of him not to let me eat just a few. But now that this foolish trial is ended, I will tell you what really became of your pet piglet."
At this, everyone in the throne room suddenly became quiet, and the kitten continued in a calm, mocking tone of voice.
"I will confess that I intended to eat the little piglet for my breakfast. So I crept into the room where it was kept while the princess was dressing and hid myself under a chair. When Ozma went away, she closed the door and left her pet on the table. At once I jumped up and told the piglet not to make a fuss, for he would be inside of me in half a second. But no one can teach one of these creatures to be reasonable. Instead of keeping still so I could eat him comfortably, he trembled so with fear that he fell off the table into a big vase that was standing on the floor. The vase had a very small neck and spread out at the top like a bowl. At first, the piglet stuck in the neck of the vase, and I thought I should get him after all, but he wriggled himself through and fell down into the deep bottom part, and I suppose he's there yet.
All were astonished at this confession, and Ozma at once sent an officer to her room to fetch the vase. When he returned, the princess looked down the narrow neck of the big ornament and discovered her lost piglet, just as Eureka had said she would. There was no way to get the creature out without breaking the vase, so the Tin Woodsman smashed it with his axe and set the little prisoner free. Then the crowd cheered lustily, and Dorothy hugged the kitten in her arms and told her how delighted she was to know that she was innocent.
"But why didn't you tell them at first? Why didn't you tell us at first?" she asked. It would have spoiled the fun, replied the kitten, yawning. Ozma gave the wizard back the piglet. He had so kindly allowed Nick Chopper to substitute for the lost one, and then she carried her own into the apartments of the palace where she lived. And now, the trial being over, the good citizens of the Emerald City scattered to their homes, well content with the day's amusement. Chapter 20. Zeb returned to the ranch. Eureka was much surprised to find herself in disgrace, but she was, in spite of the fact that she had not eaten the piglet, for the folks of Oz knew the kitten had tried to commit the crime, and that only an accident had prevented her from doing so. Therefore, even the hungry tiger preferred not to associate with her. Eureka was forbidden to wander around the palace, and was made to stay in confinement in Dorothy's room. So she began to beg her mistress to send her to some other place where she could enjoy herself better. Dorothy was herself anxious to get home, so she promised Eureka they would not stay in the land of Oz much longer. The next evening, after the trial, the little girl begged Ozma to allow her to look in the enchanted picture, and the princess steadily consented. She took the child to her room and said, "Make your wish, dear, and the picture will show the scene you desire to behold." Then Dorothy found, with the aid of that enchanted picture, that Uncle Henry had returned to the farm in Kansas, and she also saw that both he and Aunt Em were dressed in mourning, because they thought that their little niece had been killed by the earthquake. "Really," said the girl anxiously, "I must get back as soon as possible to my own folks." Zeb also wanted to see his home, and although he did not find anyone mourning for him, the sight of Hugson's ranch and the picture made him long to get back there. "This is a fine country, and I like all the people that live in it," he told Dorothy. "But the fact is, Jim and I don't seem to fit into a fairyland, and the old horse has been begging me to go home again ever since he lost the race. So if you can find a way to fix it, we'll be much obliged to you." "Ozma can do it easily," replied Dorothy. "Tomorrow morning, I'll go to Kansas and you can go to California." "I'm much obliged for all your kindness." The last evening was so delightful that the boy will never forget it as long as he lives. They were all together, except Eureka, in the pretty room of the princess, and the wizard did some new tricks, and the scarecrow told stories, and the Tin Woodsman sang a lovely song, a love song, in a sonorous, metallic voice, and everybody laughed and had a good time. Then Dorothy wound up Tick-Tock, and he danced a jig to amuse the company. After which the Yellow Hen related some of her adventures with the Gnome King in the land of Ev. The princess served delicious refreshments to those who were in the habit of eating. And when Dorothy's bedtime arrived, the company separated after exchanging many friendly sentiments. Next morning, they all assembled for the final parting, and many of the officials and courtiers came to look upon the impressive ceremonies. Dorothy held Eureka in her arms and bade her friends a fond goodbye. You must come again some other time," said the little wizard, and she promised she would if she found it possible to do so. "But Uncle Henry and Aunt Em need me to help them," she added, "so I can't ever be very long away from the farm in Kansas." Ozma wore the magic belt, and when she had kissed Dorothy farewell and had made her wish, the little girl
and her kitten disappeared in a twinkling. Where is she? Asked Zeb, rather bewildered by the suddenness of it. Greeting her uncle and aunt in Kansas by this time, returned Ozma with a smile. Then Zeb brought out Jim, all harnessed to the buggy, and took his seat. I'm much obliged for all your kindness, said the boy, and very grateful to you for saving my life and sending me home again after all the good times I've had. I think this is the loveliest country in the world, but not being fairies, Jim and I feel we ought to be where we belong, and that's at the ranch. Goodbye, everybody. He gave a start, and rubbing his eyes, Jim was trotting along the well-known road, shaking his ears and whisking his tail in a contented motion. Just ahead of them were the gates of Hugson's ranch, and Uncle Hugson now came out and stood with uplifted arms and wide open mouth, staring in amusement. Goodness gracious, it's Jeb and Jim, too, he exclaimed. Where in the world have you been, my lad? Why, in the world, Uncle, answered Zeb with a laugh. And there we go. That concludes the book. Yep. All right. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a great night. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for some Disney Dreamlight Valley. In the meantime, let's go ahead and raid off. Just it'll be a moment. Gotta see if I can raid off to this person and also get through the commercials. Okay, there we go. Yep. All right, so yeah, let's this one. There we go. All right, so we're gonna go and raid off to Matara. Please give Matara some love and support, and I'll see you all on tomorrow with some Disney Dreamlight Valley. Merry Christmas, and I should be able to say that tomorrow again. So, later.